Horizon Gents, welcome to UX, and this is American Mass Deportation 2, Caught in the Middle. US history, but it's an extra history. Yeah, second part is out for 3 weeks. Apparently, I missed it. That's what's the first part. It's an interesting series because of the things that are going on right now with ICE and everything. America has history of doing this. This is one of the things that people there's a recency bias to a lot of things. Something happens like, no, this is unprecedented. It's never happened. Yeah, if you look at the history, probably this is just a repetition of things, right? There's a pattern always. So this is interesting, like how things are going. Let's watch this one.
Desert, Mexico, 1948. A southbound train rushes through the night. On board, a man inside dreams of escape. He pulls himself up to the window of the overcrowded train car and jumps. 5 years ago, he'd boarded a train just like this one, heading north to the United States. That was by invitation, to grow crops for the war effort, and he'd left to cheers and kisses from his parents and siblings. In Texas, he'd found a wife and had children, and a farm owner who didn't care he'd overstayed his visa, at least until a week ago when INS showed up. Now he falls from the deportation train, ordered to take him to a home city he hasn't seen in half a decade, with rumors of beatings and a prison term at the end. He hits the ground hard, rolls. Behind him, he hears shouts. Mexican Border Patrol open fire from the train. A bullet slaps by, then another. He limps into the desert, realizing they aren't trying that hard to hit him. The train then carries on, disappearing into the blue dark. And he is alone in the desert night, with a sprained ankle and a long walk back north.
Damn, that's a strong opening. It's pretty shit when these things this happen, right? Like World War II, he was like called on to grow crops and everything. And now, oh, by the way, fuck you, now the law applies. Law didn't apply back then, but now law applies. This is literally like, oh, you're welcome if it helps us. Fuck you after that. Even like when certain people who have certain prison sentence are told to, you're gonna join, if you join the military, we'll basically remove the sentence, and we'll give you all the benefits and things. That makes sense. You'll be a citizen. I'm pretty sure there's that element as well. Like you get, I think, visa or citizenship, something like that. But in this shit, like, okay, we called you to grow crops for World War. If anything, these are the exceptions. People are like, okay, fine, you can stay here. Like, you're the exception. But shit like this happen, like, it's just fucked up.
This historical tale that mirrors today's headlines is brought to you by Ground News, my personal go-to for navigating today's chaotic media landscape. Last episode, we discussed how, in the 1930s, the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service began a decade-long campaign of raids heavily focused on the city of Los Angeles. Why? Well, gestures broadly, but also because it had the largest Mexican immigrant community in the nation. But we should explain why there was such a large presence of Mexican immigrants, both officially and unofficially, in Southern California.
Isn't that obvious? Like, that's the Mexico border. It's near ocean. It just makes sense.
California, and to a lesser extent, Texas. First, it's important to understand that some of these families predated U.S. control over the Southwest. After all, the Spanish began settling Texas in the 1690s and California in 1769. When the U.S. took them after the Texas Revolution and Mexican War, the existing Mexican communities stayed. Meaning, for some of these families, they didn't cross the border crossed them. For others south of the border, circular trips north for work.
What the fuck is that? Okay, what is your definition of citizen if this is the case? Like, they are the definition of citizen. So is your point is like, if you look like a Mexican and like has any Mexican heritage, you're not American? That's fucked up. They predate America at that point, at least in that region. That like Los Angeles wasn't part of America if they were locally there already. USA is consist of, like, I don't know, Italians, Irish, British. USA is not some one thing, is it? So why is it like Mexican is the one they go Mexico, like Spanish speaking Mexico, so you're not allowed? They were there before. Isn't that definition of being a citizen?
Work, trade, or family was an established pattern that continued after political division. Indeed, most migrants that came to the United States from Mexico, again, both officially and unofficially, did not intend to stay and settle. Most worked low-wage agricultural jobs, then returned to Mexico where the US dollar they'd earned could buy them and their families a better life. For a long time, this wasn't really a problem. Outside of military conflicts, land borders in the 19th century were extremely loose worldwide. There was more focus on controlling entry through ports. It wasn't until World War I raised the specter of espionage and sabotage that things like border checkpoints, visas, and extensive documentation for citizens and non-citizens really became a thing. While there is a long history of travel papers, Germany became the first
So like always, it's the Germans who are at fault. Without World War I, this would never happen. There you go.
country to require a photo with passports in 1915, and it was only in 1917 that the US followed suit. Even then, it was novel and not standard. And while today you can't even smile in a passport photo, in the 1920s, people had photos of them reading books, playing instruments, and even with other family members and pets. Now, did I need to tell you that? I mean, do you really need to know that this guy reading is a real passport photo, or this lady with her dog, or even this shared one between 30 Polish students? Technically, no. But given how heavy this topic is, also yes. Because looking at
I mean, if you're not going to tell me that, what is even point of the video? Like, I could just read a book. Yeah, like, I'd like to know this shit.
Old passport photos does remind us that behind every piece of documentation is a person, and that as we talk about big numbers here, that every number is a person and a story and a life. To get back on topic though, these deportation enforcement programs in the 1930s were basically enforcing a new standard of dealing with the border. A situation that was not considered a crisis until the Great Depression, when both politicians and organized labor started considering migration a threat to jobs and wages. Indeed, there was a reason INS was part of the Labor Department. This was considered an economic problem. And while they argued that these raids were only targeted at foreign nationals who'd crossed the border illegally, in reality, they swept up a number of citizens or legal migrants who were not given a chance to plead their case. Similarly, they scared a number of mixed status families into fleeing. Yet in 1941, the calculus changed. Suddenly, with the US entry into World War II, the draft, and most young men from
Technically, this is why you have a Second Amendment, right? So people can just say like, oh, by the way, if you look like Mexican, doesn't matter if you predate the country itself, you're not a citizen because we say so and we have guns. This is why you have Second Amendment in the first place. So government can just do shit like this. The more and more I learn about America, the more and more I understand like why people like always, like emphasize Second Amendment. What does that work for? Like people still get like deported left and right like that without even reason. I'm sure like just by statistics, there are going to be people who are like actual citizen who just got fucked off. Even the recent thing, right? Because people were like, just like it was expedited. There wasn't a process. You can never know if somebody got caught or not because the guy who's basically doing this part of the ICE could be just a-hole or racist. Like deliberately just like deport them before anybody can do anything. And Trump government literally say like, we can't do anything about it. Like once they're gone, they're gone. We can't bring them back type of shit. Like after that, like, come on.
farming communities volunteering for national service, the worry about the availability of labor reversed. Suddenly, American crops were rotting because there were not enough workers to pick them. At a time when U.S. agricultural production was a major component of supporting the war effort and often supplying food to allies, that was unacceptable. As a result, in 1942, the U.S. approached Mexico to form the Bracero Accords, named after the Spanish word for manual labor, literally meaning one who works with his arms. The Bracero program was intended to fill the labor gap by providing seasonal temporary work visas to Mexican agriculture.
Yeah, if you do this, this is just complete BS, right? This is just you do all this shit and then like, oh, by the way, World War II is here, we need you people to come back. Fuck you. Like at that point, like have some spine. There was like, South Koreans, ICE just raided very recently in America. And they were like asked, like, maybe we should go through the process. Do you want to stay? And all of them says, no, fuck you. We're going back to South Korea. We have pride. You're not going to put us in chain and we're still going to, stay around to see if almighty Americans, if they accept us or not. Fuck it. We're going back. This is that type of element. At this point, fuck you. Just don't go back. Like, okay, your labor issue, you should have thought of that before.
Agricultural laborers. These men, they were exclusively men, would travel to the US under government supervision and literally be delivered to farms who had registered as needing labor. Mexico, in contrast, got a pipeline for feeding its economy more powerful US dollars. But it was a bit more than that. See, Mexico was also a major player in this circulation of migrants from Mexico to the US and back. While the infusion of US dollar remittances to their economy was nice, the Mexican government had been trying for decades to stop the large number of Mexican men going to the US seeking work. In fact, while the Mexican Constitution of 1917 said it was a citizen's right to freely enter and exit the country, those working abroad were supposed to have a labor contract signed by foreign authorities and approved by the foreign consulate before exiting Mexico. But because US law forbid offering a contract to foreign workers before they arrived, crossing the border north to work was not legally possible on either side of the border. So through the 1920s, you had a demand for labor in the American Southwest and no legal way to fulfill it with cross-border workers. Meanwhile, landowners in Mexico were complaining to the government that all their agricultural laborers were still heading north. Indeed, Mexico had supported the crackdowns of the 1930s as a way to return laborers and frequently ran public information campaigns warning of racial discrimination and labor abuses which happened to those crossing the border to work. Yet the flow was unstoppable. So the Bracero program was seen as a way.
All right. If that's the case, just pay your laborer better wages. Okay, how are they going to pay them better wages? Because the food they grow don't make that much money. If the same food makes enough money in USA and it doesn't make enough in Mexico, that's your like governmental issue, policy issue. Like, have better politicians who actually sells those goods for better money. Like, sell it to US with the money the same way they would have grown it that way, right? Some shit like that. This is all the internal issue that can be solved. Oh, by the way, they do make money, but they just don't want to pay worker that much. I don't know, have a fucking union, right? So if there is a demand in Mexico for the labor workers, why go in US? Like, but these are all like, it's better to say it. The process of government itself is insane. But yeah, it's still solvable things.
Way to legitimize and control the already existing circulation of labor. And honestly, the Bracero program was a success by most American measures. Between 1942 and 1945, 168,000 braceros came to work in the US. In fact, it was so successful that the US continued the program after the war ended, since that agricultural labor shortage only got more dire. Victory in the Second World War spurred an economic boom due to a rise in American manufacturing, troops returning with money to spend, and the fact that the US was one of the only great powers not bombed into oblivion. Basically, the US had grown manufacturing and economic capacity, while pretty much everyone else had it diminished.
Yeah, you need like economical, like promise. Economical, like, USA even before World War I was kind of an economical powerhouse, at least potentially. Like, it had potential to be there. World Wars just disabled all the competition, Europe and everything. Now America's the only thing left, not to mention America is center of World War II, instrumental, and it's the only country that didn't get completely fucked up like the other countries, right? Like, there is, like Pearl Harbor and everything, but America was protected because of the oceans, like it's not part of Europe. So America, and also, like I said, potential of economy, yeah, that's the opportunity America need. And to this day, it's like $30+ trillion, like, America just shot up like a whole other level that nobody can compete with. Until recently, that China is kind of close. Nobody was close for a long time.
Diminished. Similarly, due to the GI Bill and a large number of demobilized troops now having received job training that might have been otherwise unavailable, a lot of farmhands never returned to the fields. Think about it. If you're a farm kid who the military has taught to work construction machinery or fix radios or maintain aircraft engines, chances are you may want to go do that instead. So as a result, the Bracero program was extended on an annual basis after the war. Though Mexico was, let's say, less happy with the results. See, as soon as the program was announced, tens of thousands of applicants thronged government offices, far more than expected. And because the program only took those with agricultural experience.
Oh, I don't know, Mexico. Why don't you make policies better that your people are happy staying there rather than like rushing to America, right? If it's such a fucking issue. Like, this is just insane. Like, if Mexico knows, like, oh, we didn't expect this many people still want to go to America, I don't know, like, do something about it, right? Give them better incentives to just stay at, like Mexico and grow crops there. Make crops like a commodity in a way by selling it to America, right? This is kind of weird. Don't send your troops there. Sell, like farm things to America with a decent price. So Mexico makes the money. USA was going to pay that money to workers anyway because everything's higher there. Every prices are higher there. So everything's all right.
Who were not landowners and in good health, a lot of interested applicants did not qualify. But given that the whole idea was to support defense production, and even the Bracero program could not supply all the labor needed, during the war, it became normal for U.S. authorities to look the other way. In fact, when agribusiness owners said they were worried participating in the program would expose them to risks, should some of the workers they hired end up, just accidentally, mind you, being undocumented, INS was pretty clear. The government, quietly but explicitly, told farm owners they wouldn't be punished if they hired off-the-book workers. Meaning that the Bracero program didn't actually cap the outflow of undocumented labor from Mexico to the United States. Business owners in Mexico protested that their government was allowing a labor drain, when those workers should be staying in Mexico to develop the country's own economy and infrastructure. At the same time, workers allowed into the US via the Bracero program complained about how they ended up working with undocumented migrants anyway, who undercut wages and lowered overall working conditions. Plus, to a certain extent, the whole situation was embarrassing for the Mexican government. This was emblematic of how the promise of the Mexican Revolution remained unfulfilled, and that poverty and lack of capital in Mexico meant its citizens were being tempted across the border. So in 1944, it began pressuring U.S. Border Patrol to tighten enforcement and work with Mexican Border Patrol to increase apprehensions at the southern border. And that request fit with the INS having changed its mission to more of a policing role. In fact, it had become a part of the Department of Justice in 1940. The result was a doubling of apprehensions, from 11,775 in 1943 to 28,173 in 1944. But this rise in interdictions also brought to light another problem. U.S. Border Patrol could not operate in Mexico, so the best they could do was deport the apprehended migrants across the border, at which point they would just try to re-enter. To prevent this, in 1945, the U.S. and Mexican Border Patrol changed tactics.
I remember the South Park episode with Cartman. That's what I'm thinking of. This is watching with binoculars. There's the one.
And began collaborating to shuttle apprehended migrants to the Mexican interior. It worked like this. Roving bands of U.S. Border Patrol operating as far away as Chicago would lead raids on farms and businesses that detained undocumented migrants, also at times citizens who did not have their paperwork on hand, and transported them to Nogales, Arizona, if they were from the western part of Mexico, or El Paso if they hailed from the eastern part. Only people who were residents of the border area were returned there, but those from further south would board a bus that U.S. Border Patrol would drive to the border, get out, and be replaced by Mexican Border Patrol. From there, the Mexican Border Patrol would load them onto trains bound for cities such as Monterrey and Torreon. A similar effort started using cargo ships bringing agricultural products.
And then what? You bring out a city, are you going to watch them then? Like, if they stay there and be part of the community, like, there's an end to this. Like, how much can you really, watch a person? If they want to go back, they'll eventually go back
To the U.S., and then returning with deportees crammed into holds. Yet Mexico considered it still not enough. In 1947, Mexico made it a crime to leave Mexico without proper authorization, punishable by up to a 10,000 peso fine and 2 to 5 years in jail. In 1949, Mexico stepped up enforcement again. It declared a national emergency to put 5,000 military troops on the border in order to increase apprehensions. The men caught were then not returned to their homes, but frequently coerced into accepting farm work in the area in a process that amounted to a forced labor campaign. In 1951,
So let me get this straight. You even put a law that you're gonna go to jail if we catch you going illegally, and they still went illegally. What does that say about you, Mexican government? How many bad policies you have to fuck up that your people like, I'm okay to go to jail for 5 years, but I'm still going to America.
the U.S. added deportation flights to the Mexican interior, contracted through private carriers. Yet, despite this gradual step up in enforcement, throughout the 1940s, the border just wasn't on most Americans' radar. In fact, the biggest pushback was in Texas, where the Bracero program was less popular because, get this, government-mandated levels for wages and work conditions were considered too generous. Many farm owners in the state complained that the government was practically forcing them to hire laborers who'd entered illegally. But that changed with the advent of the Cold War.
Okay, I kind of respect that from Texas. At least they are saying like, fuck that, I'm not doing this. Because this is in the end an issue. You can't say to people like, I don't care, we have a treaty with your government. I don't give a fuck how much official you make it. Come here to our country, work in our country, do shit in our country, put your limited time on this earth in our country. I don't know, spend a few years here of your like adult life and then fuck off back to your country, right? With very little money, right? Worse than that, oh, by the way, we'll look away if you're illegal here. We won't do anything right now, but 15 years from now, when you're getting old, you pour everything you have into this country, then we'll certainly remember you're illegal and throw you back to Mexico or wherever, where you have nothing because you pour everything here, most of your adult life, which is the issue right now, right? This is the one thing people don't realize that. Somebody told me that this is the issue and even I didn't understand before watching this series. Now I understand. You were illegal, good enough, like illegal is illegal, right? But you can't overlook it once and then suddenly if it suits you, now you're not going to overlook it. That's kind of fucked up. They spend their time here. But they came here, let's say 22-year-old, now they're 40. You're throwing them back to Mexico with nothing. Everything they have is here. They have family here. They're married here. They have kids here. They have like life here. How the fuck they're going to start their life at 40 years of age when you throw them back to Mexico? You go, oh, they're illegal. Yeah, they were illegal 15 years ago. You can't be selective in that way. Either uphold the law or don't. This is kind of fucking with people. This like, okay, exploiting people. Or we'll overlook right now, but we'll later life on technicality, we'll throw you back. It's literally exploiting people.
The global face-off between the Soviet Union and the United States intensified. A new threat narrative came to the fore that began speaking of immigrants as a political threat rather than an economic one. Now, Latino immigrants were not a risk to labor, but to national security. Stories circulated in newspapers, claiming cells of communists were forming in Mexico City, attempting to sneak into the United States and foment revolution, particularly by infiltrating labor. This was, in some ways, a bit of a joke. Mexico's conservative institutional revolutionary party had a lock on political power and even founded new security agencies to cooperate with the CIA. Yet in Congress, cries grew in 1952 that the border was a national security time bomb, with the possibility
it's just a political tool, right? People can deport, who want to deport, and others who don't care about deportation still have a weapon they could use as a political thing to catch people's attention so they can get vote. Still happen to this day. There's too many cries that happen in Congress, which is bullshit. You know it's bullshit, but they still use it because there are gullible people who are going to believe it, and it's a vote. There's a reason why people always gets this vote. Like people stay there in Congress until they get old because of shit like this.
Of infiltration and subversion. Remember that this was the height of McCarthyism and the Red Scare, as well as the Korean War, where anti-communist propaganda rocked the government. Meanwhile, the economy was starting to soften, as troops demobilized from the Korean War came home to find the job market tightening and wage competition once again causing friction. Labor unions once more rang the alarm bells of migrants taking jobs and depressing wages. And in the closing days of the Truman administration, a report on the border situation tied all of these factors together. That a, quote, invasion of Mexican migrants had undercut the economy and could be bringing subversive ideas into the country. But acting on it would be the job of the next president, a man who had no civilian experience in government, but had stepped into the presidential race in order to defend NATO from a primary challenger who threatened to pull out of it. Dwight D. Eisenhower, a military man who perhaps inevitably decided to implement a military solution to the border headed by the soldiers that he served with. And it would be known by the atrocious name Operation Wetback. And even though today deportation campaigns aren't as blatantly racist in their naming conventions, that doesn't seem to be slowing down the current crackdown on foreign workers themselves. For instance, I just saw on ground news that the Trump administration is reviewing all 55 million people with US visas for potential deportable violations.
Yeah, this is always going to happen, man, right? Like that saying, like, once they came for these people, I didn't do anything. Once they came, that's a poem, right? And then when they came for me, nobody was left. Maybe that's an exaggeration, maybe. It's always like Trump's like, oh, we're just going to deport illegal. Oh, by the way, anybody who we legally give visa to, we're going to find technicalities and throw them away, which is kind of assholey, right? If you give them visa, like it takes effort, time, and investment to get a visa. You don't want to give them visa, cancel the don't give the visa. But you don't like after giving visa, they come to America and then you say like, oh, this is technically enough, fuck off. That's kind of assholey like that. They should be allowed to sue you. Like, why did you waste my time? So yeah, now it's visa. In the future, are you a citizen? What is a citizen? How did you become a citizen? Yeah, everything's gonna get like, yeah, this is just fucked up. But one thing is like your like Democrat Republican is a thing that bounce back and forth. Before that extremism comes, okay, election is here and some Democrat will become a president and back, like it will swing back and forth like that. I think, your founding fathers, like, wait a minute, it wasn't founding fathers. It was somewhere in between. Somebody like, oh, it's just 2 terms, that's it. Somebody envisioned this shit, this happening. They're like, okay, let's just give them 2 terms. Before anything extreme can happen, some other guy will come to power. But yeah, this is insane, man. Whole thing is insane. Yeah, well, go to original video page and from there support this channel. If you like my next channel, subscribe and I'll see you next time.